This Wednesday night, the girls' Bible study was at our house, and because, so I had a meeting at the church that started at 6 o'clock. Y'all started at 6:30. So I go to the meeting. The meeting lasts for an hour and a half. So I arrive back at my house at 7:30. I walk in, and they are praying. And I was like, perfect, I get to visit. So I walk in, I'm standing in the kitchen. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. So I walk in and I sit down and I'm like, they're like, what are you doing? We just started. So I had to go to my room. Also, we had a little confusion. So everything was over, and at 9 o'clock, as is my practice, I was like, go home. They all just went on the front porch. So we'll have to clarify what is really meant by go home at some point. Brandon, you look so lonely. When they were doing announcements, it was like you... All right, I need to talk about a few things before we start. Just housekeeping stuff. I made a list. I have so many things I want to talk about this morning. Number one, if you played in the golf tournament, I wonder if anybody was more sore than I was sore. I wonder. I took Advil. I'm not being funny. It was hard to get off the couch that night. Physically hard. Number two, Mary Martin and I went to see the Barbie movie. A lot of reactions there. A lot of reactions. Who has seen the Barbie movie? Raise your hand. Would some guy raise their hand? Am I the only guy in the room that's seen it?
Probably the whole church.
We thought we were going to, but we decided.
I promise. It is hilarious. Ryan Gosling is hilarious. All right. I wish I had not brought that up now. I wish. I guess I could have asked beforehand. Right.
What did you wear to the Barbie movie?
I wore pink. I did wear pink. Okay. I thought it was going to be a children's movie. It's not a children's movie. And not because it's dirty. It's because all the humor is clever humor. It's all like thoughtful humor. It's not silly stuff. I'd watch it again. I don't care. I'll watch it again. I deer hunt. All right. All right. Now, let's get serious for a second. I love many of the songs that we sing in church. Like everybody else in the room, I don't love every song we sing in church, but I love them all. But today we sang Blessed Assurance. Who knew that song? It was fantastic. It was fantastic. Mary Martin, on the way to church this morning, we're talking about how it would be fun to go to, it's not where we choose to worship. I mean, it's not where we've chosen to worship. But like, I'm 50. I grew up in a church where it went like this. There was a call to worship. Like you came in, there was a call to worship where the pianist and the organist played a song. Everybody got quiet. And then there would be like a greeting. And then when you would sing 2 or 3 hymns. The offertory hymn, remember that? One of the deacons would stand at the edge of the table and like fig leaf and pray. And then there would be a special. The choir would bring a special, whatever that means. But we were talking about Blessed Assurance, like written by Fanny Crosby, a blind woman, a blind hymn writer. She was a prolific hymn writer. She wrote a bunch of songs that if you grew up in a Southern Baptist church, you know. But I love singing that song. I wish we had sung all the lyrics, the third verse. I looked it up while we were sitting there. Great theology in that stuff, and I wish we sang more of that stuff. That's not a critique. I'm just telling you I love salsa. I love hymns. All right. I want to clean up from last week. So thank you to Jason for we're going to be in Genesis. No surprises there. We're going to start in chapter 20. I need to clean up from last week. And I made, and I should have, and I'm glad I did, made a big deal about the fact that Lot's horrible, perverse sin did not disqualify him from salvation. And I'm glad I pointed out that it is not my righteousness or Lot's righteousness, but it is Christ's righteousness that qualifies me for salvation. What I wish I had said, and what I want to say this morning, is that in that, we should not read that story and go, it doesn't matter if I sin. I said something like that, but I just want to be really clear. We can be sure, because of the work of God in Lot's life, that his life was not, he didn't make it a habit to participate unrepentantly in those type sins. We got a picture of perhaps the worst of his life, and that would not have been what was typical of his life. Nevertheless, it did happen. So the New Testament is clear that this faith that saved Abraham is always accompanied with repentance. So we can know for sure that in the New Testament, in Peter, where Lot is described as a man of faith, a man who gained righteousness by faith, there was also repentance. And I just wanted to be clear that it's not inconsequential that he sinned, but it does not disqualify him from salvation that he sinned, right? So I'm not a perfect teacher, and I wish I'd been more clear about that as I listened back. All right. Chapter 20. Chapter 20. So let me burst your bubble about Abraham. He is not yet a bastion of faith, because chapter 20 is the story of Abraham once again being deceitful about who Sarah, now Sarah, was. If you remember, wasn't me, I was in here, somebody taught well that there was a problem when Abraham and Sarah moved to Egypt. They lied about who Sarah was, and Abraham led his wife to lie and say, don't tell them you're my wife, because if you tell them you're my wife, they may kill me to get access to you, because we know this, Sarah was beautiful. And so you read that story and you're like, that was a long time ago, I bet they've grown out of that. Well, we get to chapter 20 and they haven't grown out of it. The exact same thing happens. As a matter of fact, we learn in this chapter, they did it all the time. They posed as brother and sister more often than not. Like we'll read it, or we're actually not going to read it, but this is an important chapter, and it serves, although we're not going to study it very, very carefully, it serves to point out that this Abraham, who is the patriarch of the Jewish faith in many ways, who God established his covenant with, who is now in his 90s, is still not fully trusting God for provision. He still is not willing to say, God's got me. This is in God's hands. Let's see if I want to say anything else about that. All right. Chapter 21. Here is the birth of Isaac. How old was Abraham when Isaac was born? Somebody say it loudly. 100 years old. And how old was Sarah when Isaac was born? Somebody say it. 90. Maybe somebody said that. I don't know. I don't hear well. Let's read this chapter and let's think about, let's read, somebody read through verse 21. 21 verses 1 through 21. Go.
child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, Be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For though Isaac shall your offspring be named, and I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water of the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, Let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Haran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
A lot going on here, but let's talk it through. Isaac is born just as God had promised. Isaac is circumcised in obedience to what God had said, what we learned about a few weeks ago in that epic circumcision Sunday a few weeks ago. So as a test, because we're going to read about testing today, as a test, take a minute. Somebody is going to answer this question. I want a well thought out answer as to question. Why was Isaac circumcised? I'm not going to answer, I promise.
Wasn't it the covenant that was what God told him and everyone in his household to do?
Correct.
So he fulfilled that.
Correct. So Isaac, who is the long-awaited child of the covenant, meaning, back in chapter 12, here comes God to Abraham and says, move, I'm going to establish this great many peoples through you. He's like, I ain't got no kids. God's like, that's on me. I'm going to fix that. Nobody believes God. Sarah doesn't believe God. Nobody believes God. Sarai at the time loses her mind and says something I would have said like, well, let's fix this problem, God. I'm going to give my servant to my husband. They're going to have sex. They're going to have a child, and we're going to solve this problem for you, God. All this stuff happens. And here we have finally the arrival of Isaac. And he is circumcised because Abraham knows and Isaac will forever know and now have a very intimate reminder that he is a child of this covenant. This is a covenant that God has made. It is God's covenant to be accomplished by God, and Isaac is part of the covenant. We also we just read that we got a little drama between now Sarah and Hagar, more specifically her son Ishmael. So when Hagar had a baby with Abraham, his name was Ishmael. How old is Ishmael right here? Yeah, so he's a teenager at least. We know that because where we just read, the context is the dating or the reference we're given with regard to time is this is the weaning of Isaac. So you do the math. Let's say between 2 and 5 is when he was weaned, and so he's somewhere around 14 to 17 years old. That's important because when you read, like when I used to, or I've read this before, and I've thought, now wait a minute. Sarah's a jerk. She was being a jerk. But Sarah's a jerk. She looked over and saw a 4-year-old laughing and thumped him out into the wilderness. But that's not what happened. She did look over and saw perhaps a 15 or 14-year-old laughing. And not to honor God, but in God's plan, she's not trying to honor God, but God's going to honor himself. She goes to Abraham and says, I ain't going to stand for this. I've got a son, and I'm not going to watch Ishmael, who's not my son, mock him. So that when it says that she observed him laughing, that word, Hebrew word, is not the same as laughing earlier in the chapter. It was very likely that she saw him mocking this child that was being weaned. So just to be clear, and just so we remember that this is probably just how we would act, okay? What was Sarah's relationship to Ishmael? None, right? This is not her son. And what was Abraham's relationship to Ishmael? And what was Sarah's relationship to Hagar, the mother of Ishmael? So this makes sense from a human standpoint that Sarah would be like, no, this is my son who we're trying to bring attention to. And I'm looking over at my slave son who happens to be my husband's son, and I'm not going to stand for this. And so she deals harshly again with Ishmael. And God says to Abraham, let it happen. I know, Abraham, this is your son. Let it happen. And they are in a very arid environment, a desert environment, booted with what appears to be very little. They run out of water, and in the end, as is God's nature, not Sarah's nature, God's nature, they are protected and ultimately blessed in the sense that Ishmael is promised, and in fact, we'll find out in chapter 25, a whole nation and nations came from him. And then before we get to 22, which is where we're going to camp out today, this last part of chapter 21, there's confusion about who owns a well, and so a well was a really important thing. It was water in the desert, and we didn't read this, but Abraham is living in the kingdom of Abimelech. So Abimelech is the king, and they make a treaty with each other. Abimelech is watching Abraham, and he says, man, God's on your side. I don't want you to ever come against me. And Abraham says, before we sign this treaty, before we make this agreement, there's a well that my men dug, and your soldiers are trying to take it. I'm on. Just to be clear, I'm gonna pay you 7 pieces of livestock, but that's my well. They signed the treaty, and that's the end of chapter 21. All right, so now we get to a very well-known story. It's a short chapter by Genesis standards. Please, someone read the first. I want a girl, just because that's the way I do it sometimes. I want a girl, a woman, to read. That sounded weird. To read chapter 22, the first 19 verses. You do it.
Sometime later, God said to Abraham, He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Early in the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Abraham, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba.
All right, thank you so much. You would be a good reader of children's books. Like when you got to the part where God was talking, it was like, yeah, that's what you do. Yeah. Brandon reads children's books. I heard him read a children's book this weekend. So here is by any measure one of the most important. This is it, right? This is the foretelling, if you will, of, in a sense, dimly albeit, this is a foretelling of how God would come to save. There is so much. It's not allegory. There's so much foreshadowing of what would come to be in the way that God would bring salvation to me. So let's walk through this. Verse number 1. After these things, God tested Abraham. God tested Abraham. So we see this in the New Testament, particularly in Exodus. We see some tests that prove the faithfulness or show the faithfulness of people, and we see some tests that human beings fail. But just in the name of caution, let me make it clear, God knows what's going to happen. So this is not God testing in the sense like, I don't know, let me put Abraham to the test and then I'll decide if this is the man I want. This test, and any time we see God testing, is to reveal faithfulness or the lack thereof to the people being tested. This also cannot mean that God was tempting Abraham to fail. Many commentaries here make the point that James makes in the New Testament, that God never tempts anyone. By that I mean, God never finds it desirable to put someone in a situation where their human weakness will show up and that God will cause somebody to sin. Anytime sin is talked about in the Bible, it's on the weight of the human shoulder, not God's. So this is not a temptation that God put in front of Abraham, because goodness knows I'd be tempted not to obey. And this is not a test in the sense that God is trying to figure out if this faith that Abraham claims is real. No, this is a test, as all tests are, to show us where our faith is. So this is not God learning something. Number two. Verse number 2. He said, "Take your son." Now, listen how this is recorded, like how this is written. Spurgeon says in his commentary of this that it's almost like God is like piling on. He's saying like every phrase that I'm about to read would have been weighty to Abraham. This isn't go kill your best donkey. This is, he says in verse 2, take your son, your only son. Ishmael's gone, so he only has one son now at home. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. That's a long trip. And offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I should tell you. So we got a dilemma here. I saw Tyler read this week, and as many of you know, Tyler is a pastor. He's an ordained pastor. He's been to seminary. He's a theologically minded guy. And he and I were talking about this, And the question came up, and this has been argued, did Abraham, I want your opinion, I'll ask the question, there's not a wrong answer. Did Abraham think that he was going to kill Isaac? All right. Why? Why would you say that? There are brilliant theologians that argue that. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to give you an answer. I don't know. Who said yes most strongly? Why would you say, and there are good reasons, why would you say there are good reasons to think that Abraham believed he was fixing to go kill his son?
I think he knew whether he was going to kill Isaac and the Lord would raise him again, or if God would provide, because he says, I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you.
But why don't you just steal my thunder?
You asked. I answered.
I didn't ask you to.
Theologian. Small group.
All right, let's go through the exercise even though you ruined it. Why? What? All right, so does anybody feel like does anybody feel differently? That maybe the whole time Isaac knew that Isaac wasn't going to be killed. See, I asked a trick question, you've already ruined it.
He said, we will return to you, and then he also told Isaac that God will provide.
Yeah, so here's the bottom line. Yes.
I always thought that too, but then I had someone say to me one time, they were like, well, I mean, like, how do you think it would go over if he said, I'll be back, he won't?
That's an interesting. So.
He was lying to them or like trying to deceive them, but someone did that theory.
Okay, so to that point, that's an interesting thought. Let me clear this up. How old was Isaac right here? Hold on, better question. When you first heard this as a 6-year-old, how old was Isaac in your mind? Isaac was at least a teenager. True story. And he could have been as old as 37. Probably not. But we know when Sarah dies, and we know that he was old enough, for instance, to carry a bunch of wood on his back, right? We know that from the language of the Bible that this wasn't like the next day after he was weaned, God said to do this, right? So this is not, no matter, we don't know how old he was, but he was not 3, okay? So he's got some age on him, and y'all are messing me up. I want you to see that Isaac's faith is incredible. That Isaac's faith is incredible. Okay? So we'll get there. So here is Abraham, challenged by God to do the unthinkable, and verse 3, no questioning. Right? Listen, the first time we meet God and Abraham together, it's in chapter 12, and God says, I want you to move away and I'm going to make you a great nation. And just with that, decades before, Abraham's like, okay, I'll move, but Sarah can't have kids, so this probably ain't going to work out the way you think it is, God. I'm taking great liberty, but I'm highlighting the humanity of Abraham. And now we fast forward decades later, and God says in verse 2, go kill your son that I'm tempted to think he's young, that you have now grown to love deeply, who I've promised is that through the covenant's going to come through him. And verse 3 says, so Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. There seems to be no hesitation. So now we have arrived at a point in time where Abraham's faith appears really strong by God's mercy, by God's graciousness. So we're dealing with a faithful Abraham. So in a sense, Abraham's faith is on display here. But now I want you to see that Isaac's faith is on display here. Isaac's faith is on display. So Abraham rose early in the morning. I just read it. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place which God had told him. On the 3rd day, so what that means is in Jew talk, in Jewish, y'all know I didn't mean anything by it. So in the Jewish reading of this, they had traveled for 2 days, and on the 3rd morning he looks up and he sees where he had gone. So this was he didn't go out in the backyard and do this. This is something that took great commitment. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy," that word in Hebrew right there, boy, sometimes is like listen, sometimes it's translated boy, sometimes it's translated young man, sometimes it's translated prince. So this is not, even though in the ESV it's rendered boy, your Bible might say young man, but nevertheless, it doesn't mean that this was a 3-year-old. It can't mean that, we know. Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy, his son, Isaac, will go over there and worship and come to you again." So the point has already been made that it's possible that Isaac thought he was going to kill his son and that God was going to do something miraculous. That's the most worshipful reading of it. But we don't know what was in Abraham's mind other than he was being very, very faithful. "And Abraham took the wood," verse 6, "of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and so both of them went together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham," this is like, "My father," he said, "here am I, my son." That's Abraham. Now Isaac again. "Behold the fire and the wood. Where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So they went together, the both of them. Verse 9, "When they came to the place of which God had told them, Abraham built the altar there, laid the wood on the altar, on wood in order, and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood." So because in my mind, I want to believe that this is, I'm picturing like Abraham wrapping a little baby because I don't want this baby squirming when I kill him. And I'm going to put him on this altar, and that's what I'm picturing. This is Isaac, who is at least a teenager, who is saying, what's going on? He trusts his father's word, ultimately God's word. He allows his father to bind him, and he gets on this altar, and both of them believe something incredible is about to happen. And by incredible, I mean this could get crazy, like I might die. Isaac had to be thinking, my dad's fixing to stab me. And yet, Isaac, there's no resistance. This is Isaac learning in real time what's about to happen, realizing in real time what's about to happen, and being obedient in real time. Wouldn't it be great if that was the way I was all the time? Learning God's will, coming to grips with God's will, obeying without questioning. But that's the picture we have of Isaac right here. That's the kind of faith that God had given him. Verse 10, "Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son." And so picture it. So Isaac has fire in one hand. He has a knife in the other hand. Here is Isaac with all the wood on his back. This isn't like 2 pieces of firewood. Like this is enough to make a burnt offering. And they arrive where they're going to do their thing. They prepare the altar in the way that Abraham thinks it will be consuming to Isaac's body. Isaac is bound, crawls up on it, and the Bible says that he drew his knife. Like what's being pictured here is it was going to happen. Abraham had committed. He wasn't like, okay, God, change everything. No, he drew his knife and he was fixing to kill his son. Can you imagine? "Abraham," said the angel of the Lord, "Abraham, here I am." And you have to, like, as I read this, I have to think Abraham was like, yes. He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, right? Behold. Behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is still called that today, my translation, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." So somebody tell me why this mount's significant. Where, or at least the region where God commanded Abraham to go, why is this a significant place? Anybody know? It's not. It's a good guess, though. It's a really good guess. Anybody know why? We find out later that a dude named David would buy this place in honor of what we just read, and he would build an altar there. And David's son Solomon, in honor of what he knew, having been taught by his father, would build a temple there. The Babylonians tore it down 400 years later. The Jewish people built it back. Herod added on to it. This was the site, at least, of Jesus' trial. Perhaps this is also the area where he was crucified. It was torn down in AD 70, and all that stands there now is the West Wall or the Wailing Wall. But this site, right, this site, historically we know where all this happened. This first picture of substitutional atonement in the whole of the Bible would be the place where, at least the region, perhaps the exact mount, this would be where the substitutional atonement that made it possible for any of us to be reconciled to God happened. So this is a beautiful, providential location and thing that we just read about. Okay? Anybody have any comments about that? It's pretty thought-provoking. So, as I read commentary and as I thought about this, there's a really good reason. There's a really good reason why God spared Isaac. And here's the reason. Because it would have done no good to have killed Isaac. Isaac, Abraham, even though these were both two very faithful men, they can't atone for sin. And as a matter of fact, the ram that was provided can't atone for sin. And all of this points forward, or makes the reader today read, what's the correlation between what we just saw, what we just read about that happened, and how tightly is it correlated to Jesus' crucifixion? So let's get in our minds, and lots of theologians go through this exercise. This is a helpful exercise, but let's don't be confused or make mistakes. In this story, if we're looking forward to the crucifixion and the atonement, who would Abraham represent? God. Okay? So, Abraham, a man, was willing to kill his own son. God, of course, we know, killed his own son. All right? Who would Isaac have been? No. Isaac wasn't killed. Who was killed? Isaac deserved to die. But Isaac does not represent Jesus in this story if we try to really align this with what happened. What is funny?
Lane said us
earlier.
So, that's fantastic.
I have a good teacher.
So what I want us to see is that, like all pictures that are found in these foreshadowings of the atonement, at some point it falls apart. At some point it falls apart. What we read about here is incredible. A man willing to kill his own son. A son who is literally through whom the covenant will come. But God spared Isaac. And God didn't spare his own son. So I want you to see that we should think a lot of Isaac, but Isaac was not a foreshadowing of Jesus. What for sure was happening was that God is communicating at a great cost will this covenant come to be. Okay? Any thoughts on that? I'm not trying to tear down what you were taught in Sunday school. I'm trying to get you to see it's not a perfect picture of what happened. All right.
Well, and it's showing that God will take care of the covenant. It's on God to provide the substitution.
Exactly. And so to my, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, just kind of going back. I don't think I was here that Sunday that we talked about the Abraham, and I listened to it. So, hey, but it was the Abraham and God covenant with the smoking pot and the thing and the blood and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Like God was saying, you can't really hold up the bargain. I'm going to hold up the bargain with myself, and I'm going to be the person. Like if you mess up, which you're gonna, like I'm going to be the person that provides it. So He provided it here. And so in this moment, before we know anything going ahead, He did the sacrificing. Like God was the person that provided it, and that He's going to do it again. So you're seeing more about God and who God is and what God says and how He's going to do what He says. And we can never really be the substitution, like you said. Like, well, it's not Isaac; it's Him providing it and Him saying, "This is what I'm going to do for you."
Yeah. Great. Good. All right. That's a really good segue into verse 15. So remember what she just said, that even from chapter 12, when the original covenant, we began to see it, and it comes into shape over these last several weeks. There was this sense that I've got a part to play, says God, and Abraham, you've got a part to play. But here is this is the pinnacle, right? This is when we, and this is how it'll be talked about in the New Testament. The passage we just read is the sure fixation, made permanent reality that the covenant would be carried out. But it would not be because of Abraham's faithfulness, because we see, although it was real, we see in verse 15, and the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn. By myself I have sworn. Here is God saying, I swear on my own name. This is an unbreakable covenant. And it was unbreakable the whole time. But again, as it comes into focus, God is saying, this covenant was my thought, you were of my choosing, this day was of my choosing, and this is my covenant. And here's what's going to be the result of it. Not only is it true, verse 17, that I will surely bless you and I shall surely multiply your offspring, and they shall, as the stars of heaven and the sand of the seashore. So that's something Abraham knew. I'm going to have a bunch of descendants, which is great. That's a great honor. But how about this next part of verse 17? And of your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. You see, this is about a particular descendant. We know, because we have Hebrews, we know what was in God's mind, even if Abraham didn't understand. It's through a descendant, not Isaac, not your great-grandkids. Nope, there's a guy coming, and we know his name was Jesus, and through him, all us Gentiles even are blessed. That was the full breadth and depth of the covenant. All right. Any questions or comments about that? We're going to end in the New Testament. But before we leave the Old Testament, or before we tie the New Testament with the Old Testament, any thoughts or questions or any comments about that?
In these stories like Hagar and Abraham and Isaac, it's sometimes hard in our flesh. It's hard to see the goodness of God in it, and it makes me emotional because, and I think even like people outside of the Christian faith, this is the arguments they use. Like, how can this be a God of goodness? You know, but it makes me think of the story of the blind man in the New Testament. And they're questioning him, like, the sin of your fathers. You know, it must have been a deep-rooted sin that caused this. And Jesus answers, no, it's not. It's better for him to have been blind his whole life and to get to experience my goodness in this moment. And you can see that here. And then I look back on things in my life, and I'm like, whoa, God, where's your goodness in this? You know, like, this doesn't feel good. It actually kind of stinks. But then in those moments is when He reveals himself more to me, and I feel, you know, the intimacy of the Lord in those really hard moments.
I really appreciate you sharing that. In those moments, God says to us, as you just said, it's better that you know me. What's happening right now is more important, more meaningful than what you perceived as anguish as a human being. Right? This is a beautiful word about how God's ways exist above and beyond our understanding. And that's what's happening here. Thank you for sharing that. A long time later, James, turn there. A long time later, James would write a book that is now in the canon. And he writes a letter. And apparently what is happening, not apparently, we know what is happening. There are Jewish opponents of James who are saying, or they have Jewish tendencies at least, and they are saying, all right, on the one hand, yeah, faith, whatever, but let's don't discount the importance of good deeds. So all this theology, I'm not going to buy it, and so let's fight about it. So Paul spends his time. So picture this. This is remember which of our pastors? It was Tony Marita. So this is really helpful. So Paul argues all throughout the New Testament, throw that Jewish stuff away. Get rid of all that Jewish stuff. It is faith that saves you. And so James shows up and he's talking to people and they're trying to say something like this. I don't have to do any good stuff at all. I can be just whatever I want to be, but as long as I got faith, I'm going to heaven. I could be like Lot every day, but as long as I have faith, I could go to heaven. So what Tony Marita said, and this is really helpful, we find in James standing back to back, fighting enemies coming from opposite directions. So Paul's enemies of the gospel were these people that were insisting that we had to hang on to Jewish tradition. And James has confused perhaps Jewish converts who are arguing, I don't have to do good, it's just about faith. And so James uses what we just read to make this, it completes the story of Lot. It completes the story of Abraham. And it helps us understand our own lives and the importance of faith and repentance. So we're going to end today, really quickly, we're going to end today in James chapter 2. And this is, even for the reformers, even for Calvin himself, this was a troubling text. But let's read it quickly, and I want you to see the tie. Verse 18, James chapter 2. But someone will say, James says hypothetically, you have faith, James. I have works. And James, that's where the quote ends. And James says, show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Now jump down to verse 21. Was not Abraham our father, here's the confusing part, justified by his works when he offered up his son to Isaac on the altar? So the thought can be from reading the Old Testament passage we just read and by reading what James said right there, that what James is saying and what Abraham accomplished was that Abraham got to go to heaven and we will get to go to heaven because we do good works. That's what we're tempted to believe. But we got to keep reading because he goes on to say in verse 23, but let's read 22, you see that faith was active along with his works and faith was completed by his works. Here's 23, here it is. Pay attention. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. Abraham believed God, he's quoting Genesis 15. That happened long before Isaac was sacrificed. The point is that the fact that Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac did not make God count him as righteous. The reason that Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac is because he had real faith. It led to behavior. So anyone who claims to have faith, but that faith does not come along with repentance and good works, we are to believe it is a false faith. That's the point. So let's go on and finish. And it says, 23, and the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness years before this happened with Isaac. So Abraham was declared righteous long before he was willing to sacrifice Isaac. And he was called a friend of God. 24, you see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone, translated literally, a faith that is by itself. And in the same way was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received messengers and sent them out another way. 26, for as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also is faith apart from works dead. So here's the teaching for us today. Here's the New Testament teaching born out of the obedience we see in Abraham. We got all kind of stories about Abraham being a loser. And I got all kind of stories about me being a loser. He didn't trust God in so many times. He was willing to go outside God's will to accomplish things. He was scared of men, right? And I can relate to all that stuff. But God declared him righteousness because of faith in what Christ would do. And when Christ gives us faith, and when he gave Abraham faith through a process of what's called sanctification, he grows us up such that we become more obedient. And when we get to what we just read in the Old Testament about Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac, we see a man that God has grown up. This is to God's credit. God has changed Abraham into a man who's willing to be radically obedient, and it was because his faith was real. It was because his faith was real. So here's the application for us. I bet everybody in the room would claim to be a Christian, and everybody in the room would claim that they are going to heaven. But here's the test. With that faith, can you look at your life and see God bending you toward obedience more and more? I hope everybody in the room is saved. But I hope if you're not what I just said, I hope it's scary. I hope that this is God saying, think about your faith. Is it alive? Or is it proven to be real because of works and repentance? All right. Any questions or comments? I do love very much that these stories that I hate the word stories. We should not call them Bible stories. That sounds like they're made up. These historical tellings of these events don't exist in isolation. Not only do they teach us something about God's character, but they are interwoven throughout the whole of the Bible. We read in James what is being taught by a man like Abraham who's willing to do this. And so the Bible is wonderful. It's wonderful and it's complex, and humans couldn't have written it. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the comments that were made today. And Father, as the guy who is responsible for leading the discussion, I really am thankful when the discussion is better than what I could have prepared. And so thank you, Father, for just in comments, the way we've been led to think more deeply about your goodness and your trustworthiness and your unquestionable, unfaltering ability to do what's best for us, even if we lack great misunderstanding. Father, thank you for Abraham, and thank you for Isaac, and Father, thank you for their faith that was willing to do these incredible things. But Father, as great as they were in these moments of faith, the whole picture is this: Isaac wouldn't accomplish anything. Your covenant cannot be established through the death of a man. It can't be completed through the death of a man. And Father, it can't be completed through the death of a ram. Right? Hebrews says, Father, all that blood from bull and goats, it didn't atone for any sin. But Father, there was coming and there came a man who would never sin. And you, like Abraham, put your son on the altar of sacrifice. And Father, you drew your knife. And Father, you killed him. And so, Father, help us, please. Help me, please, to think rightly about what we just read and cause us in meditating on it to worship, please, Lord. Amen.